Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 87. If I Had a Nickel. Izuku didn't sleep. He refused to sleep. All Might was knocked out on the far too small couch by the window, and Izuku was panicking. He had a feeling he wasn't going to shake All Might off his back on this one without getting a third burner. He'd already asked for his parents' phone numbers, and he had to lie and say his phone had just died and he didn't remember his mom's new number. Kami. He was in some deep crap. And that wasn't even taking into account how poorly he handled One for All. He should have known better than to expect this would go smoothly. After roughly 5 hours of overthinking and counting ceiling tiles later, he felt like he had a few ideas on where things might have gone wrong. His notes were just as frazzled as his thoughts, since he had to do them with his left hand, but they were legible, so it was good enough for now. He obviously couldn't use that much power at once. At least, not yet. He was hoping that would be something he could work on. He needed to figure out how to harness the barest fraction of the power first. But the issue with that was the only way he could think to do that was trial and error. And if error ended up with him in the ER being rushed to emergency surgery, then that wasn't exactly viable long term. All Might should have picked someone with a healing quirk or a durability quirk, not him. He was screwing it up royally and currently had no prospects for changing that. Yeah, that wasn't helpful. All Might didn't pick someone else. He picked Izuku. Whether or not he was regretting that now didn't help him solve the problem. He needed to think about this logically, not emotionally. There was a brief moment before he unleashed the power where he was just holding it, and that didn't hurt him. Or at least, he didn't think it did. That would be a good thing to try first. Just sitting with the power activated, but not releasing it. He might be able to sort through it and figure out how to use small bits of it if he did that. That seemed to be how All Might interacted with the power, at least before the incident 5 years back. From what Izuku had observed, All Might always had the power activated. He lifted cars without any apparent change or pause to, quote, power up. But now he doesn't seem to be able to handle the constant strain, so he has to let One for All lie dormant most of the time, like Izuku was right now. After counting the ceiling tiles for possibly over the 100th time, he heard All Might start to stir to his left. Izuku quickly shut his notebook, shoved everything back in his bag, and pretended to sleep. He didn't want to hear a lecture about proper rest and blah, blah, blah. He knew. Sometimes sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford, and most people didn't seem to understand that. So, like with most things in his life, lying was just easier. He heard All Might stretch and pop more joints than Izuku even knew existed before he got up and shuffled to the bathroom. He lay there, with his eyes closed, and waited. It felt nice to rest his eyes. He was tired, but he knew better than to let himself fall asleep. His nightmares had been picking up ever since he'd been properly resting, or at least as close to properly resting as he could manage, and he didn't feel like explaining that to All Might. He felt a bit bad about it, but if he kept pretending to sleep, he was going to actually sleep. So when All Might opened the door, he started stirring as if he had woken him up. "Oh, did I wake you?" All Might asked apologetically. It's okay," he slurred out, hoping that it sounded like he'd just woken up. "I was going to have to wake you up soon anyway, but you could have gotten a few more minutes," he said with a sad smile. "I'm going to have to leave and come back for appearance's sake," he said, gesturing to his lithe form. "Then we'll be on our way." On our way to where?" he asked. "Oh, you'll be excited about this. We're going to UA," he replied with a huge grin. "Oh, shit. Was he taking him to Recovery Girl? Damn it. If he had a nickel for every time this happened, well, he'd have 2 nickels. He hoped to Kami that he didn't run into Eraser. All Might must have taken the blank face of dread he was wearing as confusion because he quickly explained, "The healer I'm taking you to is none other than Recovery Girl. You'll be right as rain within the hour. Well, you'll probably be sleeping within the hour, but you'll be sleeping fully healed," he exclaimed. Izuku let some of his anxiety show on his face in the form of surprise. She wouldn't recognize him, right? He had acted like a nervous wreck the last time he saw her, and he didn't know if he had the acting skill to not act like a nervous wreck again. He should keep his hair down. That would help. Since his roots were so dark, she probably thought he had black hair. Hair down, hood down, act normal? Excited? Kami, this wasn't going to be fun. Doria, Earth to Midoriya. All Might interrupted his panicked planning. So sorry. Izuku snapped his attention back to All Might. It's all right. You seem nervous. I thought you'd be excited, All Might said, sounding a bit sad. I am. I'm both, I guess, he answered honestly. He was very excited to be able to see UA. He wasn't allowed to go on the school trip to tour it since it would be, quote, a waste of time and space for him to go. Now he was going to get a one-on-one limited tour led by All Might himself. Take that, Kachan. If only he could gloat about this without getting his teeth knocked in. Izuku only half paid attention to the proceeding discharge process as he continued to make a plan about how he should approach Recovery Girl. As All Might helped him up into the passenger seat of his truck, he decided childlike wonder was the way to go. It would downplay his age and hopefully distance himself from her perception of Ivy being late teens or early 20s, like Eraser seemed to have assumed. Plus, it wouldn't really be disingenuous. He was actually excited to see everything. The real struggle was going to be letting himself be excited without forcing himself to shut up and put a cork in it. When they got to UA, All Might pulled up to an intercom briefly before a huge gate opened up in front of them, which they drove through. It seemed to be an underground parking garage. He didn't even know this existed. Maybe it was for staff? His suspicions were confirmed as they were walking in when he spotted a car that was almost certain to be Eraser's. Shit, there goes the weak hope he had that Eraser didn't come to work today. Come on, my boy, calm down, All Might instructed as he gently laid his hand on Izuku's uninjured shoulder. This is exciting. There's no need to panic. Huh, no need to panic? There's always a need to panic if you're creative enough, Izuku thought. Well, maybe he more than thought that, given that All Might was now laughing heartily, his voice booming off the enclosed garage. I assure you, there's no need to panic. Nowhere is safer than UA. You'd have to get very creative to find any real trouble here. All Might tried to soothe. He really didn't have to be that creative, but All Might didn't need to know that, so he kept his lips sealed and vowed to not mumble out any secrets for the duration of this trip. He chewed on his lip as they got into an elevator, and All Might chattered on about how long it had been since he was last here. We're a bit early. I told Recovery Girl to expect us at 7. Why don't I show you around a bit? All Might offered as they came to the door of the nurse's office. Izuku wanted to say yes as much as he wanted to say no. He wanted to see all that he could, but at the same time, he wanted to be seen as little as possible. They had 15 minutes until 7, and knowing Eraser, he was probably sitting in a corner sleeping until the last possible second. What could go wrong in 15 minutes, right? Not too far. I don't want to be late. Izuku agreed, against his better judgment. Too bad all the fun stuff is out there, All Might said, gesturing to a window that had a great view of the campus. Maybe we can get a proper tour in afterward. Izuku was too busy looking out the window with wide eyes to let All Might guide him further down the hall. He could see several fake cityscapes and an entire forest from here. In the distance, he could see the faint sheen of a domed roof that he was pretty sure was the USJ, a newer structure designed by the rescue hero 13 himself. He remembered reading about it a few years ago, and it sounded amazing. See that building over there? By the track that leads into the forest? All Might asked, after letting him gawk for a while. The one with the blue around the roof? Yeah, that one. All Might confirmed with a smile. I got stuck in the rafters there my first year here, he added with a fond smile. Izuku had to stop the laugh that bubbled in his chest at that. I had just gotten one for all not too long before I started UA, and I didn't know I could jump that high, he said with a chuckle. I was up there for 20 minutes before I got myself down. My teacher shouted at me that if I could get up there, then I could get down. But I was too scared to jump. Izuku couldn't help the laugh that escaped his lips. He couldn't imagine All Might being afraid of anything, much less jumping down from the ceiling. Izuku had seen him jump from the skyscraper more times than he could count. Come on, let's go see something in person. You can see all of this from a satellite, All Might said as he led the two of them down the hall. He pointed out a few things as they walked, like the one water fountain that apparently exploded during his third year, and the hallway he used to hide in when he was trying to actually study, which was rare but happened occasionally. Izuku was so engrossed with everything All Might had to say that he didn't get the chance to read the sign on the massive door in front of them. And these are the heroics classrooms, no doubt where you'll be spending a lot of your time in just a few months, he proclaimed as he went to open the door. Well, wait, we shouldn't disturb anyone, he interrupted. Classes don't start for another hour. I doubt anyone's here yet, All Might dismissed as he swung the door open. Izuku caught the barest glimpse of messy black hair peeking out of a gaudy yellow mess of fabric in the corner before he hid himself out of view. Ah, Aizawa, my apologies for interrupting your, nap. I was just, he cut himself off with an aborted laugh as he glanced over to Izuku. He must have been making a face. I must have the wrong room, he dismissed with a smile. He heard Eraser respond with a grunt before All Might closed the door and turned back to Izuku. I guess you were right, my boy, he said with a chuckle as he directed them back down the hall in the direction they came from. That was one of the heroics teachers. Well, he's effective, but difficult to talk to. That was a nice way of saying he was a sardonic a-hole 80% of the time. I'm pretty sure he does night patrols, so that's probably why he was sleeping. Maybe we can properly meet him later, he mused. Izuku hoped not. Maybe, he responded, letting dread color his tone. You'll have to meet him eventually, but he's probably not the best first impression of the school. He's a fine hero, not so much a conversationalist. How did All Might know Eraser? Had they worked together before? Izuku couldn't imagine that going well. All Might's hero persona was not the type of person he could imagine Eraser getting along with. He might like Yagi, but he definitely wouldn't like All Might. All right, here we are, my boy. Just on time, he said as he gave a warning knock on the nurse's office door before opening it. Shuzenji, it's nice to see you, All Might greeted. Recovery Girl was sitting at the computer, typing away, but she abandoned her task quickly. Yagi, I see you've moved on to breaking the next generation's bones, she shot back without missing a beat. All Might's face soured a bit at that as Recovery Girl made her way over and shut the door behind them. Oh, don't get your spandex in a twist. I'm only joking. I'm sure your boy is capable of breaking his bones all by himself, she said as she looked over to Izuku. He did nothing to stop the blush spreading across his face as he smiled awkwardly and nodded. Ha! I knew you'd find a troublemaker. Of course you did. I've got job security for another 3 years, she quipped as she went about setting up a bed. Oh, where are my manners? I'm Recovery Girl. You can call me that or Shuzenji, whichever you prefer. Well, this was promising. So far, she didn't seem to recognize him. Midori Izuku. He introduced himself with a small bow. Manners and a troublemaker. We're doomed. She grinned back at him. Come take a seat. He followed obediently and sat down on the cot she had just finished setting up for him. All right, Sonny. Yagi had the hospital forward your x-rays to me. You did quite a number on yourself. Huh, yeah. He trailed off awkwardly, unsure how to respond, both because he didn't know how much she knew and because, well, how is he supposed to respond to that? I'm going to do another x-ray just to make sure I'm not trying to heal you more than you can handle. They told me you should be good to finish up in one session, but I'd rather be sure than have you asleep in here for the rest of the week. Has that happened before? I assumed if you tried to heal someone more than they could handle, they'd just die from the shock, like tripping a fuse. I mean, if you don't have that energy to pull from, then, well, you don't have the energy to pull from. Does it work retroactively like that? He asked in one rushed breath. Half of him couldn't help but ask, and half of him had to force the words out. He'd spent a good deal of his life training that kind of response out of himself to variable degrees of success, but he couldn't be like Ivy was the last time she'd seen him. He had to be someone different, and the easiest person to be was himself. Was that himself? He'd spent so long being anything but himself, he wasn't entirely sure anymore. Oh dear, manners, troublemaker, and a brain, Recovery Girl remarked under her breath as she raised a brow at All Might. You're right, my dear. If I tried to heal more than you could handle, you would just die. But I found that people don't like to hear that that's a possibility. Apparently, it's bad bedside manner, she said with a smirk, but not to worry. I know by now how far I can safely push things along. Well, that was a bit more than mildly concerning. Was that something she had to learn through trial and error? How many people had she inadvertently killed? That must have been awful. Thankfully, he knew better than to ask those kinds of questions, so he kept his mouth shut and waited. It took about 20 minutes for her to get an x-ray and confirm that the remaining damage could be repaired in one sitting. All right. You seem to know how my quirk works already if your hypotheses are anything to go off of. You'll likely be asleep well into the afternoon, but I'll be around, so just call for me when you wake up. He couldn't help the nervous glance he sent toward All Might, and considering that both of their attention was focused on him, it did not go unnoticed. I have business to attend to on campus. I won't be far, he reassured with a kind smile. Okay, Izuku peeped out nervously. He didn't like the idea of being so vulnerable in such an unfamiliar place. People would be walking in and out of the room, and what would he have to protect himself? A privacy curtain? He'd grown too accustomed to being able to lock the office door while he slept. All right, Sonny, lay back. You'll be as good as new when you wake up. He didn't remember even going to sleep. All he remembered was a loud bang and then blood and then waking up on a hard floor, gasping for air. He heard the slinking metallic sound of a curtain being pulled along a rail, and that was enough to bring him back to the present. Are you all right, dearie? Recovery Girl asked with concern etched into the lines of her face as she offered him a hand that was more moral support than it was any actual help in getting up. Huh. Sorry. Yes, I'm fine. I must have rolled over in my sleep, he lied. The excuse was flimsy, but he was hoping Recovery Girl had the decency to not call him out on that. She studied his face, and for a moment he thought she was going to push the issue, but thankfully she didn't. Well, why don't we let Yagi know you're up? Are you still groggy? I've got some energy gummies, she offered. He graciously accepted them because, yes, he was still quite tired, but mostly he just wanted to shove one in his mouth so he had an excuse to not talk. Recovery Girl tottered off after handing him some gummies, and about 10 minutes later there was a soft knock on the door before it opened to reveal All Might. "Ah, my boy, you ready to get that cast off?" he asked cheerfully. "Huh, yeah, my elbow's been itchy since I woke up," he quipped. Recovery Girl had a third-year student from the general education course come in and take a look at his arm before they took the cast off. Her name was something like Kamiya, but Izuku couldn't remember for sure. He was too busy biting his tongue in an attempt to not freak her out with questions about her X-ray quirk. Apparently, she was doing an apprenticeship under a recovery girl and was planning to go to med school after UA. "Can you see through walls?" Izuku blurted out before he could stop himself. "Oh, yeah, I can if I concentrate." "You would be an amazing rescue hero. Did you try for the hero track? I bet you could find people in rubble if you trained hard enough. Have you tried support gear? Tunnel vision goggles might help you focus both literally and figuratively. It would take longer to search an area, of course, but you might get less eye strain. If you partner with someone like Recovery Girl, you could be a rescue duo. You find and diagnose and your partner heals. Of course, that would only work with broken bones, but that's a pretty common injury, especially in natural disasters." He stopped himself abruptly when he glanced up to see a shocked look on the girl's face. "Sorry, I ramble a lot. I didn't mean. No, no, it's okay. I did try for the hero course, but I didn't get in," she trailed off. "You can still get your license. 23% of rescue heroes don't go to a high school program, most of which get some type of medical degree. So after you graduate, you can go through another program or you can do them concurrently and essentially become a field doctor like Recovery Girl." "I didn't know that," she remarked under her breath, like she was too busy thinking to properly respond. Yeah, around 89% of heroes go through a high school program, but that's not the only way." He trailed off awkwardly, not sure how to respond. "All right, that was very educational. I'm sure you have a lot to think about with that, Katayama. But why don't you get back to class now? I think Midoriya would like to get that cast off and itch his elbow." "Oh, oh yes, of course. And thank you, Midoriya. No one's ever told me I could be a hero before," she said with a polite nod before taking her leave. Izuku didn't miss the frown that crossed Recovery Girl's face for a brief moment at that comment. She probably didn't even know that Katayama wanted to be a hero because he couldn't imagine her discouraging the girl. Plus, she would know firsthand how helpful someone like Katayama could be in the field. "All right, time for the fun part," Recovery Girl remarked after shaking off her frown and revving a small electric saw with a slightly manic grin. If Izuku hadn't already had a cast removed before, he might have been a bit apprehensive, but as it stands, he just let himself laugh at her antics. It didn't take long for the cast to be removed, and Recovery Girl had him stretch out his arm and pick up a few things to make sure everything was in order. Thankfully, it was, but Izuku couldn't stop looking at the jagged scars that now adorned his hand. He wore gloves on patrol, so Eraser wouldn't notice them, but his classmates might, and he wasn't looking forward to the conversation that would ensue if they tried to bully information out of him. What was he supposed to say? "Oh, I finally got a quirk at 14 years old and it's really powerful, but I can't prove it because it might break my bones again if I'm not careful." That would go over well, he's sure. He lost himself in his own musings, trying to come up with plausible lies that wouldn't also get him made fun of or beat up, until Recovery Girl interrupted his train of thought. "Well, what are you going to do about this then? If this happens every time he tries to use this power, he's going to lose function of his arm." "Shuzenji, I don't think that I'm not here to lie and make either of you boys feel better. You need to find another way. I can only help so much." She interrupted before All Might could argue. Izuku wanted to defend him, but All Might spoke before he got the chance. I know. I have a plan, but we would need your help. He trailed off. I'm listening, she quipped impatiently. I was going to call Gran Torino. Gran Torino was my teacher. He never had one for all, but I think he could help, he explained to Izuku before turning back to Recovery Girl. So she did know about one for all. That would have been good to know beforehand. And I want you to be on standby, if possible, he requested sheepishly. When? Recovery Girl asked without hesitation. I'd assumed after school would work best for most everyone involved, he asked with a glance to both of them. Works for me, Recovery Girl confirmed, as both of them shifted their attention back to Izuku, presumably so that he could answer the question as well. He felt his heart sink to his stomach. This was too much. Having All Might waste so much time on him was one thing. He could only work for 3 hours a day, but asking Recovery Girl to help after she'd already done a full day's work? No, that was way too much to ask for. She was already helping him far more than she needed to. Nonsense. And quit mumbling. My hearing is not what it used to be, Recovery Girl chastised. Oh, Kami. He needed to get an actual zipper for his mouth. Were the pain meds still weakly flowing through his system, making him worse, or was he always like this? How had he kept so many secrets for so long? All right, let's move our morning sessions to the evenings for now, Midoriya. Does that work for you? All Might asked. You don't argue, Sonny. It's happening, whether you want it to or not. It's just a matter of when and where. Recovery Girl cut him off. Yes, after school works for me, he reluctantly confirmed. Great. You deserve the chance to sleep in anyway. Why don't we meet here? Assuming Nedzu is amenable to the idea, All Might suggested. Oh shit, oh no. Eraser would probably go home after work to sleep before patrol, right? Kami, was it too late to apply to Shiketsu instead? How the heck was he supposed to put up with this every day if he actually got into UA? Don't you think people might find it strange that you're helping me? Technically, we shouldn't even know each other, Izuku pointed out in a vain attempt to delay the inevitable. Principal Nezu and Shuzenji already know about One for All and the nature of our relationship. We don't need to worry about that. We can reserve one of the gyms, and no one will disturb us, All Might assuaged. Well, no one can say he didn't try. Well, that sounds like a plan. He looks like he's about to drop dead, Yaki. Get that boy home and let him sleep this off properly. Let me know when you have a better idea of the time. Now shoot, she quipped as she literally shooed them out of the room like cats. You look too tired for that tour I promised, All Might remarked as Recovery Girl shut the door behind them. Do you want me to take you home? Izuku thought for a moment before agreeing. Yeah, I think that was enough excitement for the day. All Might smiled at him and ruffled his hair for the second time in as many days before leading them both back to the car. End of chapter.